What's going on, guys? I've got here a 2009 Nissan Rogue, and I'm using this car to give you some troubleshooting steps for what to do when it's not starting. I'll also show you the location of the starter fuses and the starter relay. But before we get into that, let's go over some basic troubleshooting steps. If you're turning the ignition switch and you're seeing any sort of key or security icon illuminating on the cluster here, you may want to try actually holding the key right next to that ignition switch. Sometimes the key can be failing or having a weak battery, and I found holding it next to the switch can be helpful at times. Now, another thing you can do is if your car's not cranking when it's in park, you can try putting it in neutral. These cars have a safety system where it detects what gear you're in, and if that switch is breaking and it won't detect that you're in park, try starting it in neutral. If you're able to start it in neutral but not park, then you may want to replace your neutral safety switch. Now let's move on to the fuses. So there's one fuse inside here behind this cover, and its role is to provide power to something called the ignition relay. The ignition relay is an important relay that must work in order for the starter relay to activate. So to check this fuse, it's the one on the very bottom right, fuse number 1. I'm going to pull it out just to show you what a good fuse looks like. And as you can see, this fuse is intact. Now let's get that reinstalled. And we're going to move under the hood. This is where we can find the starter relay and some other important fuses, including the fuse that sends power to the ignition switch. So over here on the driver's side, we've got to first remove this air intake that Nissan has installed. Looking at the front, there should be a total of 3 clips for you to remove. This Nissan only has 1, so I'll show you on this one. You pry the center piece up, and then you can just go ahead and grab the whole thing with pliers and just yank it out. It can come out in 1 piece, or sometimes it'll split into 2 pieces. No big deal. Now we can grab this boot and just kind of yank it out. And keep in mind, on the bottom, there is a receiver where this other intake boot goes. So keep that in mind when you're reinstalling everything. Now there are 2 fuse box covers we're going to remove. The first one is right in front of us right here. There are 2 tabs on the left-hand side. We've got to pry these tabs away from the cover. So those tabs get pried away. Now looking in here, we've got a larger tab. This one you actually push in and lift up on the cover. So in here, what we're looking at is this 40 amp fuse. It's actually integrated into a group of 3 fuses. We're interested in the one in the center. This is what a good fuse looks like. And the role of this fuse is to provide power to the ignition switch. So definitely something important for you to check out. Now the rest of the fuses and the starter relay, it's going to be in this cover. So on this one, there's 4 tabs that you push away from the cover, and you can pry the cover up and over. If you've never removed this before, it can be quite a challenge for you to get it out. This one is a little easier for me because I've had this in and out a number of times. But basically, you just pry this out. So it will come up, and then you can kind of flip it over. Let me get a good angle on it here. Now what we're looking at is the row of relays that are next to some fuses, where the fuses are on the outside. The starter relay is this relay right here. And my absolute favorite way to troubleshoot this relay is to have an assistant inside the car trying to start it. And while they're doing that, I'll actually tap on this relay. Sometimes relays can get stuck, and by tapping on the relay or even wiggling it around, you can sometimes get them to start working again. Now earlier I mentioned an ignition relay. That is this relay at the very bottom. That is equally as important as the starter relay for getting your car to start. There is a neutral safety switch as well that I mentioned earlier. That neutral safety switch receives power from this 10 amp fuse right here. So definitely be sure to check this out here. Now as far as troubleshooting the relays, all of the relays on this unit are interchangeable. They're all the same part number. So you could remove your starter relay. You wiggle it from side to side as you pull it straight out. So you could remove it and you could swap it with a different relay as a troubleshooting step. I would suggest swapping it with the relay that is not used very often. For me, that would be the rear defog relay. So you could swap in that relay and see if your car is able to start. You could also use your fog light relay, which is down here. It's just a regular 4-pin relay. So yeah, I hope that this information has been helpful for you, or at the very least a good starting point in troubleshooting the starter on your Nissan Rogue. One other fuse I want to mention, there's actually a number of fuses here, fusible links. You'll want to check all of them, of course, but according to my wiring diagram, it's this 80 amp fuse that sends power for a lot of the circuits that we've talked about today. And of course, you'll also want to make sure that your battery connections are clean, tight, and free of corrosion.